after the discussions of the past 3 days, it's difficult almost to imagine that there was a time when SANParks didn't have to consult any stakeholders on how we manage parks. We could just take decisions. And we've come away. So this talk is about how we're doing now and reflecting a bit on our process. In the 1990s, lots of good things happened in South Africa, and one was that SANParks switched from a rather command and control management paradigm to strategic adaptive management. And yesterday morning there was a wonderful session on strategic adaptive management, Tally's group, and Tally and Margaret talked about it. And if you follow, this is a more conventional depiction of adaptive management worldwide. And starting at the top there, working clockwise, where people together with stakeholders co-create a vision, and then you set objectives for reaching the vision, decide on options, implement the options, monitor, evaluate if you're going in the right direction and making changes to the vision, the objectives and the actions, and go on over time. And then, if you remember Harry's pancakes from yesterday's session, the top pancake was adaptive planning. Here I've just called it participative planning. And in SANParks, we're particularly proud of this component, those first 2 steps, where we get together with the stakeholders every 10 years when a management plan of a park gets revised. And we get all the values on the table, we consider the social, economic, environmental, political, and technological context and come up with a vision. And with the stakeholders come up with high-level objectives and then cascade it down in a hierarchy all the way down to practically implementable goals. This is what that objectives hierarchy look like in practice. This is the current one for the Garden Route National Park, but only a fragment of it, because for every level I only took one objective to the next level. And so you can imagine that's a comprehensive structure that provides the backbone to the management plan, and that is then the mechanism that is used for prioritizing of budgets and actions for the next 10 years. This is how it happened for the Garden Route recently. National Park, and we started in 2018. A person from Pretoria came down and said, it is your turn. You've got to revise your management plan. And this is more or less how it should be done. And then you've got to come back to Pretoria with a plan that looks more or less like this. And then the minister will sign it off. And so we got a coordinating team, and I was part of that, and impressed with how seriously the team here in the Garden Route took responsibility for the process. You'll see there's an extensive process. I think Margaret mentioned you need 3 days. So for the park plan, it's a big thing. So we had 7 desired state workshops involving more than 200 people, and that consolidated after that the vision and the high-level objectives. Then you go into the lower levels, and people start to develop plans at that lower levels, lower-level plans we call them. Some are for particular issues, and then you have focus group meetings with particular stakeholders. Another 300 people participate in that, another 14 focus group meetings. That's the end of the first year, then a draft management plan, 6 public information sessions to present the plan to the public. Eventually, exactly 2 years later, the plan gets signed off by the minister and it's approved. So if we ask the question, and we often say, and in that particular case we said, we co-produce our management plans with stakeholders. And if you say, so do we really do that? That was the research here. Garden Route as a case study. What is co-production? That is when all the people with the different backgrounds come together, and they are co-owners of the new knowledge that gets produced or the product to such an extent that they think, this is my plan. We developed an assessment framework for using co-production as the benchmark. That's a very high benchmark. And an assessment framework to assess the Garden Route process. Did we really co-produce the plan? And then there was an that was sort of in the midst of social distancing regulations, so we had an online discussion group or a focus group where participants evaluated against this framework how well we did, and then we compared the theory of co-production against what people said, the reality of how it happened, how it played out for us, and had a few lessons. That's what the framework looked like. We started off with the latest literature, Nordstrom and a few others who all proposed principles for co-production. But we read much wider. We ended up with those 5 principles, but then also lots of nuances in each of the principles from the literature that we got. And those we sort of used criteria to just get all the nuances covered there. And simple framework, but lots of detail under it. So if I just look at the first principle, context-based, co-production for sustainability should be situated in a particular context, place, and issue. So there are 3 criteria. There's a needs context, a governance context, and a co-production context. And then a number of questions under each of the criteria, and those were used as a structure for the discussion of this online dialogue. Some interesting ones: needs context. Does the work address a specific problem, challenge, and a need? Governance context. The second one there: were barriers, enabling conditions, and windows of opportunity identified? Co-production context. Where's the emphasis? Oh, yes, culture that emphasizes empowerment, equity, trust, and learning. So you have some tough questions, and people can discuss it and come up with how close did we get to the theory. The results, sometimes with this very rich narrative results, so you've got lots of it. So this is an interesting way, we called it speech bubbles, of presenting our results for each of the principles, and we're just looking at the context there. On the left-hand side, the plus indicates that little micro-narratives that supported the principle, and the negative there, the ones that were somewhat against the principle. So on the plus side, we had SANParks as legally binding guidelines for stakeholder engagement, both in their corporate policies but also in legislation, so that's a plus. The bottom one there says, the team, we were prepared to fight for what emerged, even where it differed from the SANParks template. The person from Pretoria that came down, it looked somewhat like this. The team said, we're getting interesting things here in the garden route that doesn't fit the template. We're prepared to send a delegation up to fight for it. So that's, that was a plus. It served the local context. On the negative side, SANParks executive decided when we will have, it didn't really boil up from the bottom. It wasn't necessarily from a local need or a perfect time. That's just how it happens. There are good reasons for that, but that's how it played out. And then open access is far more challenging in context than fenced parks. We've got more overlapping governance regimes here. And the people think they live in the park. They don't even know where the boundary is. And so many stakeholders. So then we compared the idealized conditions from theory with the actual conditions. So that's the sort of the different phases for the different principles, and again looking at the zoomed in context base. There's the needs context. The theory says it must address a local need. What we found in reality, there was a top-down procedural initiation of the process bearing no or little relation to the specific local needs. It's a standardized process in SANParks. Governance context, consider institutional barriers and enablers. So the top one was low satisfaction, but the middle one, bounded by a fence park mandate, limited consideration of the broader co-management options. We didn't consider the other overlapping governance, the provincial, the local government. We can only stick to our mandate, but we did that pretty well, so that's a neutral satisfaction. The bottom one, co-production context, consider pre-existing stakeholder relations. There was a huge commitment from the team to fair engagement. There's the national legislation, there's the provincial corporate policy, the national corporate policy, but then also the local team made a huge effort to mobilize people beforehand, and also when they were found that some people couldn't make a meeting because they work and the meeting location wasn't, additional meetings were arranged. So there was sort of going out of your way to get to a point where we feel that we've covered as much as we can. So high satisfaction for the last one. I showed this to an overseas colleague and he said, that's good, it's a pity you won't be able to publish it because it shows your organization, so your organization didn't do so well, so it'll probably be vetoed. So that's an interesting perspective. I never thought of that because that's not how we do things in SANParks. I hope I'm right. 5 lessons, thanks, 5 lessons that we learned from the results. The first one is we were surprised. We thought we had nailed it with our adaptive planning process because we've done it for the last 20 years, evolved over time, got very comfortable with it. This showed that there are some red faces, some orange faces, so shows maybe the value of critical reflection from time to time because you can develop blind spots. There are areas where we can improve. That was a valuable insight. Second one, what was co-produced and what not? And some of the quotes from the dialogue, the vision and the mission statement and the high-level objectives were truly co-developed. People felt that there was huge care taken in the exact words that these stakeholders gave us at the workshops, and to use those in the formulation of the vision and even at that high-level objectives. The lower-level plans and measurable goals were not co-developed necessarily. That SANParks went on with that. The plan is about 200 pages long, not accessible to, not in a useful format for all stakeholders, and stakeholders probably feel that they don't have co-developed this 200-page technical report. That's probably fair. It will take a massive amount of time to get that's the reality, co-production all the way through to that level of detail. One-size-fits-all approaches do not work across all contexts. There was a timing issue, frequency, duration. We felt that, just briefly, we felt that some parks, such as Table Mountain, maybe Kruger, Garden Route, the context is so different to a small fenced Karoo park that you need a completely different time frame for doing the same work, a different approach. Also standardizing the engagement approaches. We felt that you cannot just have a public meeting for all stakeholders. You won't get some of the important stakeholders there. Someone made a suggestion, one of the participants, that we should just take people out on a boat, just to get their full attention. And that might be, so be very creative about the approaches that we use. And then acknowledge the multi-governance demands. There is a legacy in SANParks brought about by fence parks that we have a level of control and can implement the plan on our own. So we co-design the vision, but then society is fine with SANParks going ahead and implementing the plan, but not so in a place like Knysna Estuary, where everyone thinks this is their estuary. So there's a need for maybe co-management, co-evaluation, to go all the way with stakeholders through that adaptive management cycle. Fourth lesson, once-off event versus ongoing journey. So during the early phase, first 6 months, all those public meetings made so many new relationships and trust was developed. But then if we don't maintain those relationships, they can quickly dwindle and fizzle out. Fatigue sets in. Some SANParks people attended over 20 meetings. We had those fires in the 2018 in the Garden Route. That was the context changed. All of a sudden there are new priorities. Lots of SANParks people worked on the fires. But the plan and the deadlines is in the annual performance plan and people's KPIs. So there are these sorts of tensions. And lack of continuity into the implementation phase. It feels if there was this intensive communication, now it just died down. SANParks carry, and the interesting one, SANParks carry all the responsibilities and risk of managing, for example, the estuary, and gets whipped if things go wrong, while municipalities, homeowners and recreational users enjoy enormous benefits, but not necessarily carry responsibility. So there was sort of a start of identifying adaptive co-management, co-responsibility as a need for some parks. That's the last lesson. Maybe it is also time for us to update our management paradigm again. That paper there by Venter et al. Shows how SANParks has updated from the 2030s, their management paradigm about every decade or so. We've been going for 20 years, maybe sort of time for a refreshment. And for some of the parks, not necessarily all parks, but some parks, maybe a more co-management and adaptive governance context to complement adaptive management. And there you see adaptive governance, where the normal steps at the bottom, but also clarifying the polycentric system. Who are the role players? Who are the supporting players? Can we resolve conflict? Then collaborate around a common understanding, allow leadership to emerge so that there's proper collaboration, social learning. so that there's inclusive knowledge goes into the next phase of mental models that reflect a holistic social ecological system and not only seahorses or fish or yachts. And and we're actually now implementing that and experimenting with new methods. So it's research that is not just research, but it's actually influencing what I think thinking in the organization. Thank you.